So hello and welcome to our webinar, Soil Invertebrates, Getting to Know the Life in Soil. I am Stephanie Frischie, agronomist and plant ecologist with Xerces. And in my role, I provide habitat expertise and support for projects in Canada, the US, and Latin America. And I also work with the native seed industry and researchers to plan and develop seed supply of important plant species for creating and restoring insect habitat. Co-presenting with me today is Jennifer Hopwood. She provides resources and training for pollinator and beneficial insect habitat management and restoration in a variety of landscapes. She oversees a team of 4 USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service partner biologists and works closely with NRCS. So at the start here, I just also wanted to let everyone know about other upcoming webinars from Xerces. We have Getting to Know the Good Bugs, Scouting for Pollinators and Other Beneficial Insects on April 8th. The Insect Apocalypse with our Executive Director, Scott Black, on April 22nd. And Supporting Pollinators Over Time, How to Maintain Wildflower Diversity. And that's on May 6th. For more information and to register, you can visit our event page at xerces.org/events. And also here at the beginning, I want to share and explain that this publication, Farming with Soil Life, is available to view or download from Xerces Publications Library. Has over 130 pages and 266 images, and it goes into more detail on the topics we're going to be covering in today's webinar. So essentially, this webinar is a distillation of this handbook. So just keep this in mind as a resource that you can access and use in addition to what we talk about today. And then throughout 2021, Jennifer and I will be delivering a series of 4-hour online short courses that will also go into more detail on farming with soil life. And again, you can check the Xerces events page for more details and registration. And if you have any questions or want to get in touch with us about these topics, you can reach us at this email, soils@xerces.org. And then the outline for today, we'll be talking about soil health basics and then get into soil animal profiles, methods for scouting these soil invertebrates, different land management practices and how they affect soil invertebrates, a few case studies to illustrate those practices, and then some more resources in terms of funding and other programs, as well as more information and more publications. So, in a way, we talk about soil sometimes as far as the functions it performs from our human perspective, but the more that I learn and think about soil, it's really simply magnificent. But again, from the perspective of human utility, there are several main functions. One is a medium for plant growth and habitat for wildlife. Another is how soil regulates water supply and filters water. Soil also recycles and stores organic matter. And then almost anywhere we are on land, on earth, soil is underneath our feet, underneath our buildings, our roads, our infrastructure. So it's also functionally important for building and construction. Soil scientists have kind of several different ways to describe and categorize soils. These can be physical, like texture, aggregate stability, or density. It can be chemical, such as pH, cation exchange capacity, or aspects of fertility. There are biological ways to categorize and measure soil, such as through respiration or microbial diversity and abundance. And then a few other things that are important are the color of soil, the age, and soil orders. And again, these are all interrelated. And especially the concept of soil health brings these different categories together. So beyond simple intuition, one technical definition of soil health might be this: the degree to which soil is optimized to support various ecosystem services, such as crop production, water infiltration, or carbon sequestration. Or another way to say that is what's on the slide here. It's the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And the graphic pictured here is a good way to think of and remember 4 main principles for supporting soil health. So on the right half, there are these 2 quadrants, and they really focus on protecting the soil. So those are minimizing disturbance and maximizing soil cover. And then on the left half of this are 2 concepts that talk really about feeding the life in soil, and that is to maximize continuous living roots, and then also to maximize biodiversity. So ways to minimize disturbance are no-till or conservation tillage. Maximizing soil cover can also be achieved through reducing tillage and maintaining more residue on the surface, and feeding the life in soil through continuous living roots, such as through relay cropping or cover cropping. And maximizing biodiversity can be achieved through crop rotation, integrating livestock, and also using a diversity of cover crops. And this takes us to our focus for today's webinar. Soil is full of life. From the tiniest microbes like bacteria, fungi, and protists, and then increasing in size to meso-invertebrates, like they're small but medium-sized, to the macro-invertebrates, and also, of course, including land plants and vertebrate animals. So there's an estimate that 1 teaspoon of soil contains more living organisms than there are people in the world. 1 teaspoon of soil contains more living organisms than there are people in the world. This includes about 1 billion bacteria, several thousand protozoans, many nematodes, and lots of fungal filaments and other small animals. Talking a bit here about fungi and bacteria. So bacteria are the most abundant soil organism, and they really feed on carbon. They contribute to decomposition of both plant and animals, and they're eaten by micro and mesofauna. And another big role that they play is to transform atmospheric nitrogen to forms that are available to plants. Fungi are also really important, and they're very abundant as well. They are the primary microorganism that decomposes plant residue and can make it available to other organisms to eat. Fungi in the soil also help regulate pathogens. And I think most importantly, from a farming or plant growing perspective, they really multiply the capacity of roots to absorb water, nutrients, and to tolerate drought. So with this image, what I want to show here is the flow of energy. The green arrows show the direction and the relationship of the energy flow, which is essentially carbon, between these groups of organisms. This graphic, of course, does not show living plants and their roots or larger animals, but it begins or zeroes in on the organic residues, which could be dead or shed material from plants primarily, also the dead bodies of animals, and that's in the green triangle at the bottom left. If we look at bacteria, encircled in orange, we see that there's movement or transfer of energy and decomposition, but these are really short networks that end and they don't they don't connect directly to many of the other groups pictured here. Then if we look at how fungi connect to those organic residues from that lower blue rectangle up through the organisms in kind of the meso-invertebrate size class and then up through the macro-invertebrates, we can see how essential the role of fungi are in transferring energy among these soil communities. And then this conceptual illustration can help us visualize the abundance of soil life within a square meter of soil. From the smallest organisms, bacteria and fungi, they're the most abundant and they form the base of the pyramid. And then as soil creatures increase in size, fewer and fewer are found in a square meter. Again, this illustration is not to scale, but it does give a general idea of these different groups and their sizes and their relative abundance. So soil life needs creatures big and small, existing in an intricate web and depending on one another for survival. And with that, I will pass over the next section of our webinar to Jennifer.
All right, thank you so much, Stephanie. All right, as Stephanie already mentioned, soil contains this vast diversity of life. Nearly 25% of all organisms on the planet, that's the whole planet, are soil animals alone. And that's why we're spending the time today to talk about these amazing animals. Soil animals can play multiple roles in their life in the soil. Decomposers break down plant and animal material into bits that are more easily used by bacteria and fungi. And the smaller the particles, the more easy it is for bacteria to find pores to occupy or niches to occupy. So for example, there's more bacteria on a piece of plant matter after it passes through the gut of an earthworm or in a fly that eats plant matter than before it passes through. So that process of being broken down by these larger animals in the soil is really important for bacteria to be able to do their work. And soil animals also burrow and tunnel in the soil, and as they do that, they're mixing nutrients between different layers and minerals between layers. So this influences soil fertility. It also influences soil structure and allows water and air to move to deeper layers, which helps aerate and hydrate soil. And those channels that these soil animals create is also useful for plant roots, which like to travel along the path of least resistance. Soil animals are also really important in numerous ways within food webs, as plant eaters or consuming bacteria or fungi, or as predators of other soil animals. And there's just a lot happening underground. And because much of it is out of sight, we are showcasing today some groups of soil organisms that are particularly valuable to soil health. And we're highlighting those in particular that are valuable to soil health and agricultural systems. I'm starting with the smallest organisms, the protozoans. These are less than 1 millimeter in size, so they're best viewed with a microscope. Protozoans were once considered to be animals, but now have their very own kingdom, still very much up for grabs as to where they're gonna fall out with their relationships with other organisms on the planet. But protozoans found in soil are single-celled and they are mobile. Amoeba can move with cytoplasmic extensions. Testate amoeba move the same way, except that they've got a harder shell around most of their body. Ciliate amoeba have hair-like cilia that they move to help propel them around. And then the flagellate protozoans have a long, more whip-like organ that they use to whip around to create movement. So all protozoans live in water films, and they eat primarily on bacteria in those water films. And it's that bacteria eating process that allows them to release nitrogen in a form that plants can really use. So a good chunk of the nitrogen that's found in plants is released by protozoans. Rotifers and tardigrades also live in water films, and they're also microscopic, best viewed under the microscope. Rotifers have crowns of cilia that they whirl and create a current to pull in for vortex feeding. Tardigrades, seen on the bottom here, are also known as water bears, and they do superficially resemble little tiny bears with their stubby legs and their claws. And their name, water bears, comes from the sort of lumbering movement that they have, nice and slow, like bears. Both of these groups scavenge for food and eat smaller soil life like bacteria and protozoa and nematodes as well. And both can enter a state of suspended animation when their water film dries up in the soil. Tardigrades especially can be very long-lived in this state, not just weeks or months, but years, potentially up to 30 years or more. And so this cryptobiotic state can be really valuable. As seasons change, tardigrades lose water in their body and just slow down their metabolism to an extreme level. Another group found in water films, as well as pores within the soil, are nematodes. These are unsegmented worms, and they're frequently transparent. They are tapered at both ends. Nematodes feed on a variety of sources, and the best way to figure out what they're eating is their mouth parts. On the left here, you can see this is a bacteria feeder, and it has lips that it grasps bacteria with. In the middle, this is a nematode with piercing, sucking mouth parts, and it feeds on plant roots or fungi. And then on the right, this is a predatory nematode that has teeth to hunt with. The nematodes in the middle, those that are plant feeders, some of those can be economically damaging. Nematodes, as they move through soil pores, can help to spread bacteria through soil layers, which can be beneficial for decomposition. And like tardigrades, they can also enter the state of cryptobiosis, but they are even more impressive in their ability to survive in this state. They've been revitalized through many different decades, but probably the record is some nematodes were revitalized from a 30,000-year-old glacial deposit recently, which is just astonishing. This is one of the most numerous animals on the planet, this group. Potworms are small, white, segmented worms. They're much smaller than earthworms, and they are often found in organic matter, where they like to feed on decaying matter, on bacteria, protists, and fungi. And as they burrow in the soil, they do influence soil structure and mixing to a small degree. So they are really ecosystem engineers on a small scale. Probably quite a lot more familiar than potworms, because they are much larger, are earthworms. These are tube-like worms. They have segmentations just like potworms. Earthworms do have a clitellum. This is a smooth band that goes around their body and houses reproductive organs. It's found closest to the head. So if you've wondered which end is the tail, which end is the head in an earthworm, look for that band, that smooth band. Earthworms are excellent burrowers within the soil, and really, if potworms operate as ecosystem engineers on a small scale, earthworms operate on a much larger scale. As they burrow, they consume leaf litter. They also consume soil minerals itself, and they improve porosity in the soil, increase the ability for water to infiltrate. They move nutrients around. They can move just an incredible amount of soil. One estimate is that they can move about 10 tons per acre. There are only about, I think what's unique about earthworms, as opposed to some of these other groups that we're going to be talking about today, is that about 1/3 of the species in the United States are introduced. So the Pacific coast has native earthworms and many eastern states have native species, but much of the rest of the US is occupied by introduced species. And what might be beneficial from this introduced species actions in some settings, such as a garden and sometimes in agricultural settings, can be detrimental in others, like in forest settings, for example. And just as a quick example, there's a suite of introduced species of about 17 species known as Asian jumping worms that have been introduced in recent years in the United States. And these jumping worms in particular like to consume leaf litter really, really quickly. They don't mix nutrients within soil layers. And so this can increase erosion, it leaches nutrients from the soil, and it removes habitat for other leaf-dwelling species. So earthworms are not always superstars of soil health in all settings and in all places. So from here on out, I'm going to just be highlighting arthropods. And arthropods are invertebrates with exoskeletons. They have segmented bodies and they have jointed appendages. And because their exoskeleton is on the outside of their body, as they grow, they need to shed it regularly. And different groups go through different transformations. Those arthropods that have incomplete metamorphosis have young that really just look like a smaller version of the adults, and they eat very similar food as the adults. So this includes groups like mites and spiders. It also includes true bugs and grasshoppers. Other arthropods have complete metamorphosis, and this means that they have life stages that look very different from each other and often use different habitat and have different food sources. So the young eat something different than the adult, and this will become really more clear when we start talking about groups like beetles, ants, and flies and wasps in just a few minutes. So to start out with mites, this is a group that has 8 legs, and they're very small, but they are visible to the naked eye. So from here on out, everything should be pretty visible. And mites have pear-shaped bodies and are often have darker coloration. They're among the most diverse group of animals in the soil and often are very, very abundant. Mites are super decomposers. They are really essential for breaking down organic materials into bits that are used by bacteria. And there's also a group of mites, the mesostigmata mites, that are predatory. And those mites feed on small insect eggs or smaller soil life like springtails and nematodes. So mites actually, not only do they live in the leaf litter and on the soil surface, but they will live within soil layers and even in deeper soil. But when they want to move around to new locations, often what they do is they hang on to other insects. So in this picture here, you can see the circle. It might look like there's a cluster of mites that's feeding on this beetle or parasitizing this beetle, but really they're just actually hanging on to grab a ride. Next up are springtails. This is a group of arthropods that get their common name from the way that they move around. They really do spring themselves around, and they propel themselves using this structure called a furcula, which you can see with that orange arrow. Springtails usually have this globular body or a more elongated body, and they too, like mites, can live at the soil surface, in leaf litter, or in deeper soil layers. Those that live in deeper soil layers often don't have eyes and have a reduced spring. Springtails are primarily decomposers and fragment plants and fragment fungi, but a few are predators also and can influence the soil microbe community through that predation. This is a group like mites that can be pretty abundant in soil. And now we move on to larger arthropods. These are millipedes. They have elongated, segmented bodies, and the name Millipedes means 1,000 feet. And they certainly do have many, many feet, though there is no millipede out there that we know of that has actually 1,000 feet. Each millipede has 2 legs per segment, and they have chewing mouth parts, which they use for decomposition. Millipedes alone are responsible for breaking down about 15% of the annual leaf fall. So that's a huge contribution to plant decomposition. They also are really good diggers and can excavate pretty deep soil tunnels. And millipedes can be long-lived. There are some species that can live up to 11 years, and they do invest time into caring for their young. The females will watch the nests carefully and guard them. Related to millipedes are centipedes. And centipedes have similar body shape, although it's a little bit more flattened, less rounded than millipedes. And they do have fewer legs, 1 per segment, still plenty of legs. Unlike millipedes, centipedes are predatory, so they have a pair of pincers that they use to inject venom in their prey. They're very good hunters, very fast runners, most active at night. And like millipedes, centipedes invest in their young and put effort into caring for their young and guarding their eggs. And then another group of important predators are spiders. Spiders have 8 legs, they've got 2 body regions, and many, many eyes. And spiders are predatory as both nymphs and adults. It's the groups of hunting spiders that we see most easily. Things like jumping spiders, wolf spiders that are found in leaf litter, and ground spiders, the groups of spiders that create webs on the soil surface or dig tunnels and spin a silken tube within that tunnel, are a little bit harder to see, but you can often see that they're evidence. They sit and wait in those webs to ambush or trap their prey. Spiders are important in conservation biological control, or the contributions of controlling crop pests in agricultural lands. Spiders, because they're a little bit more long-lived, they really only have 1 generation growing season, and because they rely on permanent habitat, they can be really sensitive to disturbance in agricultural lands and can take longer for their populations to recover. All right. So we really want to take a quick break and hear from you. We'd like to know, have you thought about soil insects in your work today, or soil invertebrates in your work before today? And if so, please tell us how in the chat box. And the chat will be visible to everybody, so we should be able to see what people have to say. Yeah, it's good to know about the connection to compost. People are thinking about that quite a lot. And somebody says that Michelle mentioned she's been on the lookout for invasive worms ever since she learned about them. And people commenting on their connection to native plants in master gardener training. They definitely make soil more alive. Absolutely. And somebody mentioned they've taught elementary kids about soil health, which is wonderful. Teaming with microbes. Yeah, thanks so much for all these comments. This is really great. Thanks. You can continue to add to that chat box if you want. Like I mentioned, everybody can see it. It's really neat to see what everybody's thinking about and what their experience has been. So thanks so much for sharing that. All right, so I'm going to continue to tell you a little bit more about some key groups of soil animals, and I'm going to move into the insects. And there are many groups of insects that live in the soil or that have a portion of their life cycle within the soil. In fact, 80% of all soil animals are insects, so that's a huge chunk. And there are so many that today we're just highlighting the importance of groups that are connected to working lands, but that isn't to overshadow all the groups that are pictured here. It's just a sake of time. But as Steph mentioned at the beginning, in our soil life guide that's just recently come out, these groups don't get short shrift. So there's plenty to read about them there. So there are also many different families of flies that contribute to plant decomposition, and I have grouped them here all on one slide just for the sake of time as well. But it's the larvae of these flies that break down decaying plant material in soil. And this includes groups like crane flies, pictured here, which make really significant contributions to leaf litter decomposition. It includes dance flies, non-biting midges, long-legged flies, moth flies, snipe flies. Here's the larva pictured here and the adult. And then snipe flies. So march flies and snipe flies, plus some others that I haven't mentioned. There are just a ton of flies out there contributing to plant decomposition. Another group of important flies on working lands are flower flies. These flies have a coloration that mimics that of bees and wasps. The adults are often found on flowers as well. They drink nectar and sometimes eat a little bit of pollen. And flower flies are the most important non-bee pollinators of crops. And they are also important pollinators of wild plants in different settings, especially in high altitudes. But it's the larvae that have the connection to soil. The larva pictured down here at the bottom that has an aphid grasped in its jaws. Larvae are often decomposers in soil. Some can also be predatory in soil or predatory on plants. And larvae of this group can be really important in controlling crop pests and contributing to conservation biological control. This group overwinters in the soil as well as larva or as pupa. And because of their close tie to flowering plants, they really need pollen and nectar as part of their life cycle. Another group that contributes to crop pest control are soldier beetles. You can see in this picture down here, this is a larva, and that larval stage has sickle-like jaws and is hunting in the soil or in the leaf litter, occasionally on plants. And they'll eat life big and small. They'll eat small insect eggs, and they'll also attack larger animals like slugs or snails. The adults have leathery wing covers and are found on flowers, drinking nectar and pollen. They can also be predatory too and hunting on vegetation or in leaf litter. The adults do superficially resemble this next group, fireflies. Firefly adults also have leathery wing covers and are known for their ability to luminesce, to glow, and they use those luminescent organs to attract mates by flashing patterns. Larvae also have some luminescent segments on their body, and they are predatory. They are excellent hunters and will search earthworm burrows to track them down or follow slime trails of slugs or snails to find that prey. So even though these firefly larvae are quite small, maybe extending an inch or so, they are attacking prey that's quite a bit larger. Our next group is also very, very important in conservation biological control and to contributing to crop pest control on farms. Ground beetles are predatories, both larvae and adults. You can see the massive jaws on the larva and on the bottom photo here. And the adults are often dark in color and have ridged wing covers. They're most active at night. And they're also excellent hunters, and they will feed on crop pests, including slugs and snails, caterpillars, leaf beetles, grasshoppers, and so much more. This group requires pretty well-drained soil to overwinter in, or overwinters in clumps of bunch grass. So permanent habitat is important to this group, as well as some of the others that we've already mentioned. Our next group of beetles are decomposers. These are burying beetles and carrion beetles. And both of these different groups have fairly colorful patterns and are both excellent at tracking down carrion. For example, they can find a dead carcass from about 2 miles away within an hour. So really excellent at finding the carrion, the food source that they need. And carrion beetles pictured here on the bottom lay their eggs directly into carrion and then develop fairly quickly. Burying beetles, on the other hand, have a different approach. They will dig underneath the carcass, and then when the carcass sinks down into that hole, they're covered up. And that's their way of securing the carrion and reducing competition, because there is a lot of competition for dead bodies. Decomposition of carrion is particularly important because it's a really nutrient-rich source, and it can really influence soil fertility and plant communities. So these beetles play a really important role. And just before I move on to the next group, up on this burying beetle, you can see a couple mites up here. Those are, and down here by her leg, those are mites just hitching a ride. And often mites will actually move from carrion carcass with these beetles. Some of them hunt on things within the carcass, and so they have a really nice relationship with the burying beetles. They don't compete for the carrion itself. They'll eat pest flies that get in to feed on the carrion. So yeah, they just really work together pretty well. Next up are dung beetles. This is also an important group of decomposers. And these beetles have an oval-shaped body and scalloped legs. Those scallops on their legs are really useful when it comes to digging. This is a group that's really good at digging. The larvae are C-shaped, so they're soft-bodied grubs and curl up into a C shape, and they're found within dung. And particularly, they prefer herbivorous mammal dung. This is another group that's really good at identifying their food source, so they can find dung within minutes. And they're also really efficient at moving their dung, because just like carrion, dung is a hot commodity, so they need to find a way to protect it for themselves. A couple strategies that they use are to lay directly into that dung pat and then decompose it quickly as they have fairly quick larval development. Other dung beetles will dig a tunnel underneath the pat and then bring pieces of the pat down into the tunnel, into their nest, move that back and forth and where it's more protected from competitors. And then others pictured here will take balls of dung and roll it to a nest nearby. So dung beetles can remove about a ton of dung per acre per year, per hectare, excuse me, per year. So that's a lot of dung. And it's really important for livestock managers, because their removal of dung and incorporating it into the soil really affects the palatability of forage. It also reduces habitat for parasitic species of livestock. So flies like screwworm and hornworm, which can be very injurious to livestock. Dung beetles can help reduce their numbers. And on farms, dung beetles can also disrupt feeding flies found in dung that carry E. coli. So this can reduce the spread of foodborne pathogens. So these are all really critical contributions. There's been an estimate that this activity is worth about $380 million a year. But in addition to those good works, Dung beetles also contribute to mixing of soil and soil structure, and they help move seeds around within soils as well. Our next group are ants, and like their relatives, the bees and wasps, ants have a constricted waist, and they have elbowed antennae. Ants are truly social insects and live in large colonies. Within colonies, individuals have specific roles to play. There's a queen, there are sometimes reproductives, there are those that guard the nest, those that clean the nest, those that nurse and feed the young, and those that forage. There's multiple generations with a nest. It's a very complex society, and their nests can be quite extensive underground. Up at the top, you can see this is a picture of an ant scientist who took a plaster cast of a nest, so it can get quite deep, 12 feet sometimes, and very complex with different chambers and tunnels. So as ants are creating this nest and living in this nest, they're excavating soil and they're mixing soil, and it's really that reason that they are one of the most significant animals that you can find in the soil. They integrate nutrients, they help aerate and hydrate soil. They're also predators. They contribute to decomposition of plant and animal material, and they also disperse seeds. So they really, along with being nature's grand architects, play some really amazing roles. Related to ants are ground nesting bees. And there's about 70 to 80% of all of our species of bees in the United States that nest in the ground. They might make shallow nests depending on the soil type, or deeper nests in more sandy soil or well-drained soil up to 1 meter or more. So they can be quite deep, and they also move quite a lot of soil when constructing these nests. Most ground nesting bees are solitary, so this means that each individual female is constructing her nest and excavating it, and then gathering enough pollen and nectar to provide for her young. So bees make so many trips between flowers to gather enough pollen and nectar to feed their young. This is really why they're such critical crop pollinators. They really are one of the most efficient groups of pollinators, not only of crops, but also of many wild plants. And I mentioned that many of these bees are solitary. What that also means is that they don't often defend their nest. So they won't sting their nest because they're sting if their nest is disturbed, because they're really not willing to put up the risk of losing their own life. If they die, then they're not able to reproduce, and that's what they need to do. So that means that these insects are very, very docile, and they aren't a health risk to people. There are a number of ground nesting bees that will nest in crop fields themselves. So in this lower right picture right here, this is a sunflower field, and you can see there's at least 8 or 9 openings here that indicate a bee nest. And then squash bees, pictured over here on the left. Squash bees are bees that specialize on the pollen of plants in the genus Cucurbita. And their life cycle is so closely tied to squash plants that they'll often nest in the ground below that squash plant. So when their young emerge the next year, in theory, they'll be closer to the squash that they need to survive. So that means that whatever is happening in that agricultural field does have a big influence on these bees that nest so close at hand. And then similar to bees, there are a number of ground nesting predatory wasps. And similar to bees, most of these are solitary. They're really good diggers. And the females are constructing their nests and then providing for their young. Unlike bees, predatory wasps provide their young with arthropods, crickets, spiders, grasshoppers, caterpillars, stink bugs, all sorts of different animals. And that means that these wasps contribute significantly to controlling crop pests. The adults, in addition to their hunting activities, keep up their energy by drinking nectar, so they're often found on flowering plants. And it's another group for which flowering plants is so critical to their life cycle. These predatory wasps do superficially resemble bees in a number of ways. They look very similar, but without all the body hairs and the specialized pollen carrying structures. And many predatory wasps do have some extra serrations on their legs to help them grab and hold prey and bring it back to their nest. Our last group today are some herbivores. And there are some animals that eat living plant material in the soil, feeding on roots. And these include weevil beetle larvae and scarab beetle larvae, as well as wireworms, which are the larvae of quick beetles. It also includes a few groups of moths, which have caterpillars that feed in the soil on roots. The adults, of course, live above ground, but it's the caterpillars that dig in the soil and chomp down on roots. Some of these species can cause damage to plants, and some of these species can be crop or ornamental pests and cause economic damage. But in a balanced system, there are a number of predatory animals in soil that can help, and we've covered many of these groups that can help keep these herbivores in check. So hopefully you've gotten a snapshot of this amazing slice of life that's happening underneath our feet all the time. These animals can make a really huge difference in our life. They break down plant and animal material. They take complex chemicals and turn them into simple compounds that plants can absorb. They alter soil structure, mixing nutrients between layers and, and improving the way that water infiltrates soil. And that work all enhances plant productivity, which is a direct benefit to us in our effort to grow food and to grow products that we use for shelter or fuel. But the work of soil animals also contributes to our life in a couple other ways. By incorporating organic matter into soil, this prevents the release of more carbon into the atmosphere. So it allows soil to sequester more carbon, and this contributes to climate regulation. I mentioned that there are a number of groups that contribute to the control of crop pests, but many of these groups also contribute to controlling other organisms and keeping populations of those in check. There's many pollinators that we covered today, and then these animals are also food sources for other larger wildlife as well. So really, soil is this amazing foundation for life. And I'll turn it back to Stephanie.
So now we're just gonna get through the section here where we talk a bit more about farming practices in soil life. So I've got a delay here in advancing the slides, so bear with me, please. Yeah, with all the positive things and the functions that soil animals do in the course of living their lives, supporting those animals and building soil health go hand in hand. So this is a simplified table to summarize the effects of ag management practices on soil life. And if we look at tillage in the first row, with less tillage, there's more soil life. With fertilizers, with lower additions of synthetic or inorganic fertilizers, there is more soil life. With lower use of pesticides, there is more soil life. And with greater diversity above ground, essentially plants or other animals, there's also more soil life. And looking at some of these practices a little deeper, some of the ways that tillage impacts soil organisms is through desiccation. It breaks those fungal hyphae. It destroys tunnels, burrows, or nest sites of these soil invertebrates. Inorganic fertilizers cause spikes in nutrient availability, and certain organisms parallel those spikes, so they have abundance and boom and bust cycles. and excess amounts of those nutrients are lost to the water or the atmosphere. So it's money that's not well spent, and it also can cause contamination elsewhere. And then pesticides, which includes insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, and miticides. Those lead to direct and indirect negative effects on these soil ecological communities. A Xerces resource that we have that's easy for anyone to use at home is this soil scouting guide. And I don't know if Jennifer or Rachel are able to put that link in the chat at some point, please. That's also available for free download from our website. But in a nutshell, you choose the site or habitat type that you want to monitor. And here's an example. From that I did last year, late summer, around West Lafayette, Indiana. And I had a cornfield that had some reduced tillage and cover crops are used there. I also had the cool season grass roadside between the road and that cornfield. And then a more diverse cattle pasture with both some non-native and native perennial plants in there. But in a nutshell, you just get a plastic container that's 5 inches deep or so. You dig a hole that matches that container size and put the container in the hole and fill in the soil around the sides of it so that the top of the cup is level with the soil surface. And then you leave that overnight. And here I just left the cup dry. This is a no-kill method, and this is good if you're coming back in 12 hours and checking and you just want to do a capture and release. But you can also put water with a little bit of dish soap in there as a way to capture and kill and immobilize what you catch in there. And so you can just see here a few differences in the cornfield. What was caught in this trap were springtails and a few ants. In the middle, the roadside had a few crickets in there. And then in that diverse pasture, there were a lot of crickets. So it's just a good way it's very accessible to begin to observe and learn what some of the insects are around you. So next, we're going to just do a very high-level overview of some of the programs and funding support that's available through NRCS. NRCS is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, an agency within USDA that helps to design and administer conservation practices. And together with the Farm Service Agency, or FSA, they deliver funding for landowners and farmers who care for soil. So these are federal programs, but they vary state by state, and they're actually administered at the county level. So the first point of contact is your county NRCS or Farm Service Agency office. And important to NRCS is this concept of resource concerns. So the resource concern is, essentially what the problem is to be addressed. And in this case, we're looking at soil organism habitat loss or degradation, where the objective is to improve or reverse that habitat degradation or loss. Another resource concern, as officially defined by NRCS, is creating terrestrial habitat for wildlife and invertebrates. And the objective there is to improve the quantity and quality of habitat to meet the requirements of some of these target terrestrial and invertebrate species. And I apologize for the delay here in the slides. Jennifer, I may just ask you to advance because I'm just getting too far forward or behind.
Yeah, I'm
Would
happy.
you be able? Okay, thank you. Okay, here is a little excerpt from our Farming with Soil Life handbook, where we have a table that lists over 35 different NRCS practices that support soil organisms. Also, if you're not familiar with NRCS, they work through a couple of programs. One is called EQIP. It's an acronym, EQIP. It stands for Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Another one is CSP, a Conservation Stewardship Program. And we won't go into much more detail about that today, although if people have questions in the Q&A, we can talk about that. But this is just to let you know that there are many, many programs and practices that can help you support soil organisms. Next, please. I'll highlight just a few of those. So each practice has a number and then a name that essentially describes what it's for. 345 is residue and tillage management or reduced tillage. 329 is residue and tillage management no-till. And then in a little bit, I'll talk about this other CSP enhancement. But again, thinking back to those soil health principles of minimizing disturbance and keeping the soil covered, you can see how these programs to manage and reduce, to reduce tillage and manage residue would be beneficial to that. Next is conservation cover, number 327. And this is to establish and maintain permanent vegetative cover. So again, we are maximizing keeping the soil covered. We're maximizing above ground diversity. We're also having this permanent vegetative cover and perennial species. So we're maximizing that living plant root. Next is wildlife habitat planting 420. And this improves degraded wildlife habitat for the target wildlife species or guild. So there's many groups that can benefit from this, both underground invertebrates as well as pollinators. And not every state has adopted 420. Many still use 327, the conservation cover that we saw previously. But for states that do offer this practice, it's really straightforward to use, and it's really great for beetle banks or pollinator habitat or other beneficial insect habitat. And then next is practice 340, cover crops. So again, many resource concerns related to soil life and soil health are some that cover crops address, again, such as protecting the soil, increasing that above ground diversity, and maximizing a continuous living root. Next is field borders, practice 386, and this includes a diverse mix of native and low-cost, non-native, but also non-invasive plant species established at the edge or around the perimeter of a crop field. And in these cases, it's important to protect the habitat from pesticide drift that might be being applied to the crop. And similar to some of these other practices we've seen, the field borders can be really diverse, and they include perennial plants. And so again, they're important habitat for macrofauna, which can then move into the crops and function as natural predators of pests. Another one is CSP 595, Pest Management Conservation Systems. I'm sorry, not CSP, this is under EQIP. It's to develop some pest management conservation systems that can reduce the potential impacts to invertebrates on farmland. It can also be used to support pest prevention strategies. So here what we see are pheromone traps in these photos. So you're helping to scout and get a sense of the timing and which pests you have and what their abundance is. And you can use that information in integrated pest management try to really only rely on pesticides when you've reached these threshold levels. And then related to that is an enhancement under that practice. And the CSP enhancement targets reducing the impact of livestock parasite treatments, such as ivermectin, that then you could pass through the livestock and be present in that manure and still have the active ingredient be harmful to dung beetles that consume the dung from treated animals. So just summarizing here the series of NRCS practices, here's another short list of many other associated practices that are available and that will help support soil life. Next, we have a few case studies. First at Saugan Valley Farm in Minnesota. This farm has 12 acres of diverse vegetable crops on 30 acres. They are certified organic, and they also grow and sell native plants. They have a CSA as well as have some wholesale vegetable customers. Next, there's a side-by-side example here where it shows, they use some traditional or conventional tillage methods, but they're continuously experimenting with ways to reduce their tillage and find something that works well for their particular crops and the scale that they're farming at. So on the left, you can see this cover crop mulch. Cereal rye was planted in the fall and a cash crop was planted later. And that cover crop residue is left fairly intact and it serves as a mulch down the row centers. And on the right are some interseeded cover crops. The cover crop is annual ryegrass with Dutch white clover, and those are planted before the cash crop is harvested. Again, this is helping them reduce their tillage. Their fruit is cleaner and it's also easier to harvest after rainfall. And then in addition to some of those cover cropping practices, they also have native plant field borders, as well as some clover borders and flowering cover crops, such as buckwheat. And again, these are ways to maximize above ground diversity and create all this nice habitat, either on the borders or mixed between fields. The next slide is an example from Agua Gorda, a Latino farming cooperative in central Minnesota, just showing kind of a series of different flowering cover crop trials that they're trying as another example of using and implementing above ground biodiversity to support underground diversity. And when you have a lot of flowering plants in there, you're supporting pollinators and beneficial insects too. We will move from Minnesota then to Montana with an example from Casey Bailey's farm. The practice that we're showing here is crop rotation. That can be difficult to capture in a single image because rotation happens over time. It's not all there at once to be photographed. But because of the position and system that Casey uses, this rotation of crops that they have is a series of bands on their 8,000 acres. And that has helped them to diversify their cropping system, break pest cycles, and enables their transition to organic. They are also benefiting pollinators with increased bloom availability, both in their cash crops and cover crops. And just as importantly, they're dramatically reducing the exposure that these beneficial pollinators and insects get from pesticides. And we have one more example here at Clark Land and Cattle. And pictured here is Rick Clark in the center with his family who farm in West Central Indiana. They are organic with no tillage, but and kind of all these other amazing statistics that are bulleted here on the slide. But Rick's clear to say that they did not get there overnight. It's been a learning journey that they've been on for more than a decade now. And what started them on this learning journey was about 12 years ago when they had planted some cover crops in an area that they were trying to help recover from erosion and further protect their farmland along a waterway. And the following growing season was a really dry year. And the soybeans that were growing where the cover crop had been did so much better yield-wise than the beans in the same field that were planted where the cover crop had not been. And that was just, a kind of real life demonstration for Rick and his family of how beneficial cover crops can be for their cash crop. So they now use a 6-crop system that includes corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, pea, and then the +1 is cattle. And this crop diversity, as well as the skills they've developed in planting green, which means planting the cash crop into the cover crop and then terminating the cover crop after that, and keeping that continuous living root and keeping all the soil animals alive and well, has also, I think, been really key to their success. And then I know we've got several gardeners or master gardeners here. And I just have one example to show. This is actually some of the soil around my house. And the previous owners had put this weed barrier fibrous mat down. And I'm not, at least 10 years it's been there. And I'm working to remove all that. And as I peel that back, the soil beneath it is just hard and compacted and not full of life. It's been deprived of all those living roots and all the things it needs to function and to support plant growth there. So I've been planting a kind of cover crop for a few years. And you can go ahead to the next slide, please, Jennifer. This is actually Rick Clark's garden, and he's also used a cover crop cocktail there. I think there were about 12 species in that one that he used in his berry patch. And he's showing, there's a strawberry plant down there that he's parted the taller plants with. But he's using that again for some temporary weed control and just getting more soil built back up in his garden. So I hope I'll be able to do the same at my house as well. So again, you can practice those same 4 principles for soil health, whether you're farming thousands of acres or just a small plot in your yard. Okay, so we're already over an hour here, and there's only so much we can introduce and talk about in a 1-hour webinar, but here are a few other publications that are much more detailed that we recommend if you want to read further or see more images. The first 2 are really technical, and they're available as free PDFs. And the third is a lovely book by Dr. Jim Nardi, written for the general public, and it just also provides a lot of good technical information and illustration and photos as well. And I want to especially thank and acknowledge Jim's contribution, both this presentation and also our Soil Life publication. He generously contributed his illustrations to us for that. And I also think of the Xerces Society as another resource. We're a science-based nonprofit organization, and we work in education, outreach, applied research, policy, and restoration to protect invertebrates and their habitats. The butterfly pictured here is the Xerces blue, and we take our name from that butterfly. And the sad part of this story is that it was the first butterfly to go extinct in the United States due to human activity, the loss of its habitat. And roughly 50 years ago, a group of concerned butterfly conservationists organized with the goal to prevent that from ever happening again. And in the decades since, that group of butterfly conservationists has grown and transformed into the 50+ staff that you see pictured here. And we're in, a dozen or 15 states across the country. And then next slide, please. We work in several areas, pollinator conservation, a lot of that is habitat work, agricultural biodiversity, working with endangered species and aquatic invertebrates, also programs and a team that focuses on reducing pesticide use and managing pesticide use. And we also work in urban conservation and in policy and advocacy. Xerces has an amazing array of publications on plants, pollinators, other insects, and restoration, habitat work. And again, those are available on our website. And to highlight a few that are more specific to this topic today, there's a brochure on farming for pest management, cover cropping for pollinators and beneficial insects. And then on the right, another excellent handbook for identifying and learning about beneficial insects and how to manage your farm or land with them in mind. And then next, I showed this earlier, but we have these beneficial insect scouting guides, one for soil insects, one for insects you'll most likely find on foliage, and another on flowers. They're really simple techniques that anyone can do. And again, here is the cover image and the links and information about our Farming with Soil Life handbook and the upcoming short courses that we'll be starting to deliver later in April, and our contact email as well. So closing things here, I just want to say thanks to all of our donors and Xerces members who make our work possible. If you're interested to learn more or to join us, you can follow this link to become a member. And I also want to acknowledge our funding for this work, which comes from Northeast There and Organic Valley, the Aqua Gorda Farm, the Casey Bailey Farm, Karen and Dana Jacella of Saugan Valley Farm, Rick Clark of Clark Landing Cattle, and then our fellow Xerces co-workers, Eric Lee Motter, Sarah Foltz Jordan, Rachel Dunham, and Mace Vaughn. And with that, we have a final thought here that is from 1938, the USDA Yearbook of Agriculture. Essentially, all life depends on the soil. There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have evolved together. We hope we've helped to illustrate that a bit more today. And with that, we've got one more question to put in the chat, and that will segue us into the final Q&A session. So this time in the chat, we're asking to hear from you about which particular practices have you implemented or seen implemented to support soil life. So we've got using cover crops, no-till, no pesticides, leaving the leaves, which again is letting that soil be covered and keeping residue there. Because not only is it protecting the soil, it's also important habitat and overwintering shelter for a lot of these insects. Planting a log and leaving stems. Again, many insects have part or a lot of their life cycle where they need a shelter, such as a cavity in a log or the hollow center of a stem. So creating that kind of habitat is important as well. Yeah, reducing tillage, no weed cloth, no chemicals, lots of great things in the chat. We'll be saving the chat so Jennifer and I can review that later, but yeah, there's a lot of great things in there. So I think with that, we've got advanced to one more slide, Jennifer, and we'll just leave this here. The soils of our yards, gardens, and fields swarm with thousands of kinds of minute animals and plants of which we know little or nothing. We depend on the soil for our very existence, and yet the soil we daily tread underfoot is almost a veritable terra incognita. And then we have a little springtail that are pretty cute. So yeah, Jennifer and Rachel, we can move over to the Q&A session now.
All right, thank you so much, Jennifer and Stephanie. We have a lot of really good questions, so we're just gonna dive right in. We have about 11 minutes to get through these. We probably won't answer. If you do have questions, if you, Stephanie or Jennifer, don't mind putting an email address in the chat box that people can reach out to if their question isn't answered or if they have further questions. This was one of my favorite questions that Jennifer tagged that I get a lot is, can earthworms regenerate if they're cut?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, but we don't really know a lot about it yet. And it also depends on which part of the body gets cut and where. So the head needs to be part. You can't cut off the tail and have the tail regenerate. Yeah. So.
All right, good question. Any suggestions on how to control jumping worms in my garden? This person's located in the mid-Atlantic and never uses pesticides.
Yeah, that's also a really good question. There really aren't control strategies right now. You know, just one thing you can do though, if you have a lot of jumping worms, is they are really adverse to mustard. So mix some mustard with some water, pour it on the soil. They'll come up to the surface and you can just capture them all up and do with them as you wish. But that's probably an unsustainable solution, as probably more will move in from the neighborhood. But it's worth trying if you are concerned about it. But I think, yeah, there's just not a lot of information out there about control of earthworms. Another option is to check in with your local extension. Oftentimes they don't have control strategies, but can tell you more about how to identify jumping worms from other native earthworms if you've got native earthworms in your region.
All right, thank you. This person thought that crane flies and other fly larvae were benthic macro invertebrates. Do you want to expand on that?
There are lots of flies that are benthic as larvae, but there are lots of flies that are also terrestrial and contribute to plant decomposition. And the amazing thing about insects is that there's never one rule that fits a particular group. So there's always some group that bucks the trend. So there might be some aquatic members in the same family as a group that also has terrestrial members.
Right. Do you have any good references for learning more about the economic and ecological benefits of dung beetles?
Yes. Yep. We have a publication that was actually co-authored by our colleague Mace Vaughn that details really nicely the economic benefits of dung beetles and how they came around to those estimates. So if you want to send an email to soils@xerces.org, that's, or either to Stephanie or I on our emails, that's a great way for us to just zip the PDF back to you.
All right. Is an overabundance of springtails bad for plant growth and production?
Nope. Nope. They are just really abundant. And so it's not a sign of concern at all, but just probably a sign that there's a lot of good, tasty things for them to eat in that area. But no, they don't feed on living plant tissue.
Does a native plant have a specialized relationship with life in the soil that non-native plants do not have?
Yep. Do you want to answer that question?
Can you repeat that? I'm typing in the chat. Didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, of course. Does a native plant have a specialized relationship with life in the soil that non-native plants do not have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there is some knowledge and research that's been done to understand this, and the diversity of plants and where plants grow is one field of study, and then the diversity of bacterial groups and fungal groups that grow in the soil, they also have different distributions in areas where they are. Some of them are generalists and some of them are more specialists. So there are some fungi that can be found in almost any soil in the world and also associate with any plant. And then the specialists are fungi and plants that have a tighter kind of relationship. So I think to get back to the question, it varies. Certainly non-native plants have relationships with these soil microorganisms as well. Again, the concern sometimes with non-native plants is when they can become aggressive and over-competitive to the extent that they decrease overall diversity of different types of plants and flowers that can be at one location, and so they're displacing some of our native plants. And also the time of year when they flower or the shape or color of their flowers may not be completely matched to the types of wild bees or other pollinators, or even to the caterpillars who are native to an area. So they may not, non-native plants are often mismatched ecologically to the insects of an area, which again is why native plants are our best choice and recommendation.
Thank you, Stephanie. Another question, do landowners need to be actively farming to qualify for the NCRS programs, or can the land be recreational land?
And the best thing to do is to check with your local USDA field office. There should be one in your county or one nearby, and they can walk you through the things that they have for qualifying for technical assistance or for financial assistance. But everybody qualifies for technical assistance, so anybody can reach out to their USDA office and get input from NRCS about their property, questions that they might have, guidance on grazing, for example. All of that is free no matter what. But if you're looking for financial programs, like enrolling in some of the programs that Stephanie mentioned through CSP or through EQIP, then there are a few more parameters, but your field office is the best person to talk with about those.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there procedures to reintroduce soil microfauna into a reconstruction project or rehabilitating farm fields?
I think the short answer is no, except through the soil health building steps that Stephanie mentioned. Having living roots in the soil, some of those other steps will create the conditions in which that life can. Stephanie, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the question was microfauna, so animals. And generally animals are left to move and disperse on their own. But I'm also seeing other questions in the Q&A about introducing mycorrhizal fungi. And that there are some commercial companies that sell cultured strains of mycorrhizae that you can purchase and either inoculate your soil or inoculate seeds that you plant, and which then inoculate the soil. And that's a whole area that you need to do some reading and learning about to understand what's really beneficial and what's a good source or a good value for your money. Because again, you might be buying mycorrhizae that are already present in your soil, and you're not really gaining anything from that. I'm not endorsing this company, but Michael Bloom is one of those companies, and they're founded by a researcher who did her PhD on soil mycorrhizal fungi and their interactions with plants. And the webpage just has a lot of wonderful information about this whole concept and practice. So that would be my suggestion for further reading. It's called Michael Bloom.
Thank you, Stephanie. I may have read that question incorrectly. I apologize. Okay, so it looks like we have time for maybe one or two more questions. This question, I have the same problem at my new house with compacted soil under weed fabric. It is so compacted, how can I plant in it?
So I actually just used wheat straw this was my process after I first removed the weed barrier and it was hard soil. I didn't try to plant anything right away. I put the straw down, and again, that helped keep it covered. It helped keep it from drying out, from really going between hot and cold. It helped it to start to get some life moving in there naturally. I let that be there at least 1 or 2 years, and then I began to use a polyculture mix or a cover crop cocktail. I'm in that stage right now. I've planted that, and then may do that again this year. And there again, I'm just trying to let roots use what's a daikon radish, or it's also known as a tillage radish, and those are edible as well. But their roots are really good at growing and expanding and starting to break through that hard soil, and you can eat them as well. So that's kind of another nice transition option there, if that helps.